California. Thank you very much for being here tonight. And let me ask you, first of all, about the president's decision not to participate in this hearing on Wednesday, this tack of stonewalling. How effective do you think that's going to be? What does it tell you about the White House's approach to this process generally?
Well, David, I'm not surprised. The president and the White House don't have a factual defense. And I think Adam Schiff's report is going to detail that this was not just one errant phone call between President Trump and President Zelensky. There were dozens of officials, high-ranking officials, involved for months in compromising our national security to badger Zelensky, to investigate Joe Biden for Trump's political gain. And the White House really doesn't have an answer to that factual issue.
The cry that we've heard here is there's no due process. I was struck by a line in that letter that Jerry Nadler sent to the President of the United States, his most recent letter. At base, the President has a choice to make. He can take this opportunity to be represented in the impeachment hearings, or he can stop complaining about the process. How resonant are his complaints, do you think? As you look at what your Republican colleagues are saying, how they're approaching this, how much is that resonating with them?
Well, it has no basis because he's the one who's blocking John Bolton, Mick Mulvaney, Don McGahn from testifying. So he's the one who isn't allowing the evidence to come out. But the case for impeaching Donald Trump is actually a conservative case. It goes back to Edmund Burke, who said that the rule of law is a check on arbitrary power. And I tell my Republican friends, I say, today you have someone with a conservative ideology that's riding roughshod over the rule of law. What if tomorrow you had someone from the far left doing that, as we've seen in many other countries? This is a threat in a polarized time to American stability and to American prosperity. And people have to wake up to what's happening and what this president is doing.
Very grateful for that allusion to Burkean philosophy here on Sunday evening. Let me ask you about the report itself. Again, the understanding that we have here at NBC News is a draft of that is going to be circulated among the committee tomorrow. There's going to be a vote on Tuesday night. What are you looking for specifically as you see that document? What does it need to tell you? What does it need to tell the American people? How should it be constructed? What do you want it to look like?
I think it has to be simple. It needs to lay out what the president told his underlings to do in terms of withholding aid from Zelensky, what the president said in terms of having Zelensky announce a public investigation on Joe Biden before giving that aid, and how many people knew about this. I mean, that's the surprising thing to me based on what's come out. This wasn't just a few people. There were dozens of people who have been implicated. And I think that that's the case that has to be made to the American people.
Where do you stand on the breadth of this investigation, this inquiry as it goes forward? I was struck reading that letter from Chairman Jerry Nadler with the nod to the Mueller report, to the obstruction that was written about in Volume 2 of that report. Seems to me that could give an indication that he's willing to go broader, to keep this focused more broadly, not just on Ukraine, but other issues as well. Is that something that you support?
I do support it being broader, but I think it has to be swift. It needs to focus on three things: the Ukraine issue with Trump withholding the aid, the President and White House's continued obstruction of Congress, and the obstruction outlined in the Mueller report. Those are the three main things that we should focus on, and we need to get this done before we adjourn for the holidays.
It needs to move expeditiously, I hear you saying. One would hope that everybody would be engaged with this process, and I'm going to quote a little bit from the letter that the ranking member of the Judiciary Committee sent to Chairman Jerry Nadler, requesting more witnesses. He says, "I request that you expand the number of witnesses called upon to testify on December 4th to give the American people a wider array of perspectives regarding impeachment. I further request that you equally allocate those witnesses to the majority and minorities choosing." That's what he said in print. That's what he said in that letter. I want to play a bit of tape now of him on Fox News Sunday Today singing a different tune. Let's take a listen.
First and foremost witness is Adam Schiff.
So you want to bring him in before the committee, not just to present a report, but to take questions from Democrats and to be cross-examined, if you will, by the Republicans?
He needs to be. He's put himself into that position. If he chooses not to, then I really question his veracity and what he's putting in his report. I question his, the motives of why he's doing it. It's easy to hide behind a report. It's easy to hide behind a gavel in intelligence committees, behind closed-door hearings. But it's going to be another thing to actually get up and have to answer questions about what his staff knew, how he knew, what he did about the whistleblower report, his interactions that he's had with the Ukraine, the other things that he's had over time in this process.
Congressman Khanna, oh, what a difference 12 hours makes. I mean, how do you react to that? The seeming absence of good faith there, the totally different tune, as I said, that he's singing when he's on TV versus what he's saying in print to his Democratic colleague.
Well, notice what the ranking member isn't saying. He isn't saying we can bring someone who will show that what the president did isn't an impeachable offense. He isn't saying that the president was legitimate in pressuring Ukraine's president to dig up dirt on Joe Biden. What he's doing is trying to find another scapegoat, and they're attacking Adam Schiff. They've attacked witnesses that have been testifying because they have no factual defense for the president. And some of us have said, if the president has a defense, let's hear it. The president is allowed to testify. We've said any of his witnesses are allowed to testify. They can have a conservative legal scholar come and explain to the American public why this isn't unconstitutional. But they're not willing to engage with the substance.
I'm going to have you take over.
Well, I have supported the call for withdrawing our troops and for having negotiation. But we can't have the president doing it on a whim. We need actual diplomats, someone of the caliber of Richard Holbrooke or George Mitchell, who are going to sit down and negotiate something with the Taliban that's going to also protect women's rights and get to a peace agreement. And the problem here is that the president hasn't been consistent. It's not reasonable to say that we're going to have a ceasefire before entering into negotiation.
Short trip to Afghanistan, and then people have to pick up the pieces as a result of that.
They do, and what you usually have in the House Armed Services Committee is the Secretary of Defense comes and cleans up the president's remarks, and you have career officials trying to adjust for what the president says. But the fundamental flaw here is the president's lack of humility, his lack of understanding that he can't drive this process, that there's actually some value to career expertise, and past presidents have known what they don't know and rely on career diplomats, on people who dedicate their lives to solving these issues and don't just do things based on whim. And that's been why our foreign policy is in the mess that it is.
Maria,